So once again, we are continuing Unit 6. Menucha of Sir Named Danger and Sir Moses Montefiore. We are continuing on my pages. It's page 14 where it says Hashkaya. Really? Hashkaya is page 10? Oh, no, that's 7. Give him 6 from there. Oh, yeah, sorry. So, as we already started learning the Gemara in Moed Katan, we mentioned several times, the first Mishnah in Moed Katan says that you're allowed to water during both Chol Moed and Shmita. It's Moed Katan, so we have to cover Chol Moed. Shmita is because it's both Moed Katan and Chol Moed and Shmita. 18, okay. So the Gemara asks, Bishlama Moed Mishum Tirchahu Vinkom Pseida Sharu Rabbanan. And this leads to an interesting machloket. Says Rabbeinu Yerucham, you'll see it, what Beini is the bottom of page 14. Rabbeinu Yerucham says, Kol davar she'tir mishum davar aved, gomer hamelacha mikol v'chol. Meaning, on Chol HaMoed, there's a slight deviation, we'll get right back. On Chol HaMoed, if there's a heter to do something, you don't need to minimize the amount of how much you do, right? So the Gemara says, you have to water the plants. Why? Because you can't come back after Chol HaMoed and they'll all be dehydrated, right? Everything will be dry. Everything will dry out. So you're allowed to water on Chol HaMoed. So how much do you water?
Regardless of what it is, if there's a heter to do it, you don't have to minimize.
Exactly. That's what Rabbeinu Yerucham says. All things, right? All things that are mutar mishum davar aved, mishum davar aved. All things that were concerned about the loss that you might. Yeah, that you might have a loss, so you're allowed to order the plants properly. Don't say, well, let's do the minimal amount. The Rambam, see the next Rambam, Kol melacha, שאם לא יעשה אותה במועד, יש שם הפסד הרבה, עושים אותה, ובלבד שלא יהיה בטורח הרבה. כיצד? משכין בית השלהין במועד, אבל לא בית המשקה, שאם לא ישקה בית השלהין, תהיה הארץ הצמאה, ייפסדו כל האילנות שבה. וכשהוא משקה אותה, לא ידלה וישקה מן הבריכה וממי הגשמים, מפני שהוא תורך גדול, אבל משקהו מן המעיין, בין שיצא כתחילה, ומשיכו משקה בו, וכן כל כיוצא בו. מעניין, כל דבר שאין בו הפסד, צריך לשנות.
למה זה שלהין כספר?
Or why is it shlahin or shlachin? I don't know. But it sounds like it sounds like the Rambam, what they learned from the Rambam, that you should do b'shinui. That you shouldn't do it the normal way. You should do it in the way that will cause the minimal amount of strain, minimal amount of work. So Shulchan Aruch holds like Shulchan Aruch, yeah. Sorry. Shulchan Aruch holds like Rabbeinu Yerucham, davar aved mutar la'asato b'chol hamoed b'lo shinui, and Rav Neubert, the Shmar Torah Hilchata, points out an interesting thing. This is where we're connecting to us. Yotzeh, you see in the Shmar Torah Hilchata here, גם לגבי שביד, דקיים בלן דכל לאוק מי אילנה מותר, ולכן מותר להשקות עץ כדי שלא ימות. הנה חינמי דמותר להשקות בבת אחת, אף יותר מאשר צריך לקיום העץ, גם אם יתר ההשקעה תשביח את העץ. כי דווקא השקעה אחרת, שאינה לקיום העץ, אלא רק להשבחתו אסורה, כאילו באותה השקעה עצמה בכל אופן מותר. בחוזני של הלכות שביעית לא מוזכר דין זה במפורש, but what is the important point? The important point is this. We can say, in order to keep my garden minimally alive, I could set my timer to water it for 10 minutes 3 times a week. But to help it thrive, if I allow it to go longer, it'll also thrive, not only avoid destruction, not only evade the death that would come upon it from getting dehydrated. So he says we see from Rabbeinu Yerucham that we're not expected to limit it. Once you're watering the garden, you can water it properly. So what this would mean is, here, let's what if I need to manually open the watering system, right? I'm putting the computerization aside for a minute. But if I need to manually work the system, I'm just turning it on and off. So if I have two options, I can either open it once a week for an hour and let it go for an hour and a half, and then it'll really thrive, or to keep it alive 3 times a week, I'd go and let it go for 10 minutes. It's better to do it once, and once I'm doing it as much as it needs, than to do it over and over again just to keep it alive. So even though you say, wait, but here I'm only doing the minimal amount that's needed to keep it alive, the point is, once we're matir to do it, so do it properly. That's what we're learning from Rabbeinu Yerucham. The Shulchan Aruch holds like. Well, what about it? Right. So I think there are two. In other words, there are two. Once you're watering, because that's Rabbeinu Yerucham is not talking about opening a valve, right? He's talking about watering properly. I mean, he might be talking about buckets, which is even more, right? And he says once you're doing it, just do it as much as you need. And it seems that it's better to do that one time properly as much as you need than to do it over and over again. That's the important thing.
So, and I know this isn't true. Keep from rooting or something.
Okay.
Like that.
Yeah.
You wouldn't still be allowed to plow to prevent the weeds from rooting, which would be harming your land and stealing the nutrients of the soil, because plowing itself is more of a derisive.
Right. Correct.
This couldn't cover a derisive issue.
Right. The important thing.
That's true.
No. What you're saying is actually happens to be. I think everything you said happened to be correct. But most importantly, your main point that he's talking about kol davar she'tiru b'shem davar avet. There's kol davar she'tiru is all the things that are asur midrabanan, and then Chazal say, well, if you're going to incur losses, you're going to have to. So we allow you to do the work. So it says so do it properly. Now, by the way, I just want to point out what Rav Neubert says. He points out the Chazon Ish doesn't mention this. There is room for argument, and I'll explain how. One can argue reasonably that when it comes to Chol HaMoed, we say, if you're doing the work, do it properly, and that's it. And that way you won't have to go do it 2-3 times, because on Chol HaMoed, the criteria of tircha and having your head in the work, that's the problem. We have no problem with working on Shmita. I think we're all working during Shmita, right? Maybe not working in the fields, but we're working during Shmita. So doing more work, less work, that's not the issue on Shmita. The question during Shmita is, how much are you causing the field to grow? How much are you causing your crops to create new fruit? How much are you part of that process? So there, I could argue, no, water it the minimal amount to keep it alive, because I'm not supposed to be a part of the process of causing new fruit to fruit. But when it comes to Chol HaMoed, go once, do it properly, and get it over with. Don't be in that limbo, right? So there is room to. This isn't necessary. There is a chidush, and Rav Neubert saying, but that's what we accept lahalacha. We'll see from a few other sources, but that's rather we prefer one long watering as often as we need. I'm not saying, hey, I have to do only once a week. If it needs twice a week, do twice a week. Sometimes there are many plants for which, right, grass, I think, can't take once a week and then, right, it needs to be watered more often. But also with grass, you can probably do every other day for a bit longer. Whatever. I'm not. Ask your gardener. I don't know exactly how things. The idea is, once you're doing it, do it properly. It's better, and therefore it's better to minimize the number of times that you need to go out and do it. Let's have a look at the Rambam. The Rambam writes, משכין בית השלכים בשביעית ויסדר הזריעה שצמאה ביותר, ועושים את אמת המים כתחילה, וממלאים את הנקעים מים, מפני מה התירו כל אלה שאם לא ישקה, תעשה הארץ מלאכה וימות כל עץ שבא. והואיל ואיסור הדברים האלו, וכיוצא בהם מדבריהם, לא גזרו על אלו. So, the question is, מפני מה התירו כל אלה, there are a few strange things in the Rambam here. Number one, מפני מה התירו כל אלה, שאם לא ישקה, wait, ישקה is כל אלה? Or the Rambam writes, מפני מה התירו כל אלה, presumably there are a few other things that the Rambam also matter. They write certain kinds of weeding that could harm the tree, right? That's number one. Number two, im lo yashke, so he's talking about watering specifically. Now, Tasalat Melachavi, Amud Koretz Shabbat is very poetic for the Rambam. He does, I'm not saying he never does it, but it's, you know what I'm saying, this is a bit poetic. The expectation would be that the Rambam would say, ukme is mutar. So, I mean, this elaboration is a bit surprising in the Rambam, right? The Rambam could have said, you need to keep the trees alive, right? Yes. Well, what's going on here? Says, as I mentioned before, it's hanging on the wall over there still. Rav Shaul Israeli. יש תמיהה לרמב"ם. גם אם משהו צריך לאריכות דברים, פשוט, מאחר שכפי שהוא מסביר שבלי השקעה ימות העץ, נמצא שההשקעה היא מגדר וקמילנה. אז he could just say, right, that כל מלאכות שאם לא יעשם ימות העץ, או ייפגע העץ, or whatever, וכולי. There's something a bit too poetic and too elaborate about this Rambam, so he says like this. נראה שהוקשה לו, שבעוד שכל אלה מותרים מצד קומי, נתר לה בצורה מצומצמת ובדקדוק, שלא יהיה פעולה יותר מאשר להעמיד אותו על עומדו. There is a uniqueness to watering, because when it comes to, we talked last time about pruning, and we said, well, within pruning, there are different kinds of pruning, and then when it comes to cutting the branches, I mean, personally, not saying pruning because we saw like 6 different Hebrew words for pruning, right? When it comes to cutting the branches, you're allowed to cut them in a certain specific way that won't encourage new fruit, also won't encourage new growth of the tree, but will keep the tree alive, right? Keep the pests away or off, right? Not be overburdened, not to make sure the tree is overburdened with branches. All those things are mutar. So there it's very, very specific. How much can you cut? Only as much as won't overburden the tree, right? There you have to be very precise. We learned about the precision last week, right? But when it comes to watering, fundamentally it's different. לפי זה צריך לציין גם באלה שהותרה השקעה כדי לשמור שלא יתייבש. ההשקעה צריכה להיות מצומצמת ובעומד מדוקדק, שלא יהיה בה כדי להפריך יותר. אבל לא מצינו עזרה מעין זו בהשקעה. לזאת בארם, right, as opposed to cutting the branches where we say you can only do it if it's for a specific need, but no more than that. When it comes to watering, there's no such distinction. לזאת בא הרמב"ם להסביר שיש שוני מסוים בין השקעה לשאר מלאכות. השקעה היא עצם בעיקר החיות של הצמח, בלעדיו נהפכת הארץ לשממה ולמדבר. על כן ראו חז"ל להתיר השקעה בשוני מכל מלאכות שהותרו בלעוקמי. It's different not בשוני, not to do השקעה בשינוי, but the definition of the heter of השקעה, of watering, is different in kind from the general heter of ukme. The general heter of ukme is to do the very, very precise thing that will keep the tree alive. When it comes to watering is so fundamental to the tree, or to all agriculture, right, to all plants, that you have to allow it to be done properly. באלה שההשקעה נצרכת, לא שום הגבלה. חייבים לדייק בהשקעה, שלא להשקעות יותר ממה שנחוץ לקיום ולא להוספה, כי אין דבר כך שבזה ובזה שהותר לגמרי. Now again, meaning he's more makeup, right? I said earlier b'Shem Rav Neubert that he says once you do it once, so do it properly once, but you should minimize the number of watering. Rav Shaul Israeli says no, watering is free. Watering do freely. Why? Because watering is keeping the tree alive, and that's why the Rambam is so poetic when it comes to watering specifically. The Rambam says that watering is that's the life of the tree. It's not something we. So that's I thought about that. Right, but I thought about that, but I do wonder if that's just because we don't know. It could be that it's true. The question remains: if I know that it's enough, the tree isn't going to die. Or I'd say it differently. I'll water some now, and I'll look tomorrow if I see that it's starting to look a bit brown. So I'll add a bit more, etc. I don't think the tree will die from that. The tree doesn't die in a day, or the bush. Most bushes don't die in a day. So I wonder. I hear your point. For me, it's very hard to assess how much water they actually need. I don't know. to say, so it's better to err on the side of caution, right? Etc. Rav Yosef Lieberman, not to be confused with Joe Lieberman. What? Oh, sorry, guy. Should Mishnat Yosef. He Dafka agrees, he accepts not Rav Shul Israeli, but Rav Neubert. We'll see right now. He should Mishnat Yosef. אנו מתרים להשקות וחוששים גם לפסד הזוטה, לכאורה מותר להשקות כל צורכו. שמצמצם רק כדי חיי האילן, יכול בקלות להגיע נזק לפירות שיפסדו לגמרי. This is Philip's סברה, right? בקצתם, בכמותם, ובאיכותם, ובפסד הרבה. Meaning, if you're going to start playing with watering, you can play, this goes in it's directionally like Rav Shul Israel, right? Which is, I think that's what Philip was saying, right? That watering is so fundamental to the tree. If you're going to start playing with how much water do you actually need exactly, precisely, you'll end up killing some of your plants. So you need to know in advance that you could be more free just to keep it alive. You have to go over. But Maise, he isn't matir as much as Rav Shul Israel, as we'll see now. למעשה יש ללמוד מדברי החזון איש, אסור להשקות כבכל השנים, אלא צריך לצמצם רק כדי חייו. כתב צריך לשקול כל עבודה ועבודה, אם יש בזה חשש שימות העץ, ואם אפשר להסתפק בפעם אחת, אסור לעשות שתי פעמים. We learned this in the previous unit 5, when we were talking about, is it, right, we asked, when melachot le'ukmei, is ukmei, what's the idea behind ukmei? Is it fundamentally not a melacha? Keeping the trees alive is just not a melacha, right? Or is it heter mishum hefsed? So I brought this Chazon Ish. Chazon Ish says you should do the minimal amount, which implies mishum hefsed, right? So it implies it's mishum hefsed, because if it's a matter of definitionally not a melacha, so do it freely. It's not a melacha, right? Just like we're all doing our melachot, right? Right? We spend all day in the hospital. Well, what's the heter? It's just not a melachat tzedeh, right? So too, watering, you can say it's not a melachat tzedeh because that's not the melachat tzedeh the Torah talked about, right? Kamash melan, it is, but there's a heter mishum tzedeh. That's why it says the Chazon Ish do the minimal amount. Therefore, says the Mishnat Yosef, that you really should minimize the watering as well. בספר שנת השבע ציין דברי חזון איש אלה גם לעניין השקעה. מותר להשקות רק ההכרחי ביותר. לא דם ילכו למועד השרי לגמרי כשמשקה. דעתם האיסור מפני טרחה, ולכן אם בלאו הכי משקה אין איסור, אבל בשביעית יסוד האיסור שמבטל לשביתת הארץ. כל מה שמשקה יותר מבטל לשביתת פי, ולכן להתיר על מה שנחוץ בלבד. Here now. So
why does it start with the fruit?
Right. So I think he starts with that for Philip's point, where he said meaning on the one hand he says do the minimal amount. Now what's the minimal amount? The least that you think that it won't be damaged. Don't go under that. Because he does accept that the Rambam does emphasize, that's why I said directionally he starts from the same place where Rav Shul Israeli started from, right? The Rambam says if you don't water your plants, they're going to die. Watering is a very fundamental thing to plants. It's not just another melacha. It's the most important thing that the vegetation needs, and therefore, err on the side of caution. But it's only erring on the side of caution. It's not a complete and absolute heter like Rav Shul Israeli said. So we'll end up with Rav Rimon here. Then I'll say the Chazon Ish about because I thought about the Chazon Ish here. There's another point about the Chazon Ish. Let's see Rav Rimon. הנחה לגבי השקיה, הוא להגדיל את המרווח בין ההשקיות, כך שההשקיה תהיה רק שיש צורך אמיתי, and here he also emphasizes the other side. אין צורך שהדשא יציב, אלא שיהיה צורך במים כדי שלא יציב. Right? לפני שיש צורך אמיתי, you can say, well, only when it's actually drying out, right? Say, no. You have to err on the side of caution. You say, when it really needs it, meaning when you're worried that it might, right? It's to err on also, the Machmirim here agree that you have to err on the side of caution. So I'll just make that clear. כשמשקים ניתן לעשות זאת בצורה חופשית, להשאיר את המטרות פתוחות כמה זמן שרוצים, like Rav Neubert wrote, right? When it comes to השקעה במחשב, once you're not involved, you're allowing your computer to do it by itself. מכוונים את מחשב ההשקעה לפני השמיטה, יש מקום לנהוג כדעת הרב אליהו, כדעת המקלים, לכוון את המחשב כרגיל. If you're not involved, if it's happening on its own, so here I say, Rav Shul Israeli says, do it freely anyway. I'm not involved, I'm not doing it actively. So between that and that, there's no reason to machmir more than Rav Shul Israeli. ניתן להפעיל את המטרות לעתים רחוקות יותר, ואז להשאיר הפתוחות לכמה זמן שרוצים, as Rav Neubert said, once you're doing it, you could do it at the sof and as much as you want.